The conference room screen turned red with my name in bold letters. Director Blake Ashford systematically dismantled 3 years of my career in front of the entire leadership team. Missing deadlines, poor communication, risk to the project. Each accusation landed like a punch I couldn't block. The executives nodded along, their faces serious and convinced. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but Blake raised his hand with a smile that looked almost apologetic. "I think we've heard enough," he said gently. That's when I realized this wasn't an investigation. This was an execution. The verdict had been decided before I walked through the door. Blake had already won. The meeting ended with a single instruction: report to HR immediately. As everyone filed out, Blake placed his hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry it came to this," he whispered. But his eyes were cold, calculating, and completely confident. I sat outside HR for 20 minutes, replaying everything Blake had said. When HR finally called me in, they explained my system access would be temporarily restricted pending investigation. My project files, my emails, my reports, everything was locked. I asked to see the evidence Blake presented. They told me I'd receive copies once the process was complete. I walked back to my desk in a daze. My screen greeted me with an access denied message. The shared project drive. Denied. My archived emails. Denied. Blake had moved fast. Too fast. Later that afternoon, I saw him in the hallway talking with Jordan Brennan. They were laughing about something. When Blake noticed me watching, he smiled. Not a warm smile. A smile that said I won. That's when everything cleared. This wasn't about my performance. This was about something he needed to hide. 6 months earlier, I was Blake's golden employee. He praised my work regularly and discussed future opportunities. "You have a real instinct for this," he'd say. I worked late nights to meet his ambitious deadlines. I volunteered for the hardest projects. I trusted him completely. Blake assigned me to lead the Titanium project, a high-stakes client initiative worth millions. It was the kind of opportunity that could define a career. I poured everything into it. Nights, weekends, every ounce of energy I had. Blake checked in constantly, offering guidance and support. The client loved the progress reports. Leadership praised the results. I felt like I was finally proving myself. I wasn't careless. I wasn't incompetent. I was indispensable. Blake made sure I believed that. He built me up so high that no one would question him when he tore me down. He needed someone talented enough to execute the work but expendable enough to blame when things went wrong. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept replaying Blake's accusations in my head, searching for truth in the lies. One detail kept nagging at me. Blake claimed I missed a critical deadline on March 14th, causing delays that cost the client thousands. But I remembered that day clearly. I had submitted the deliverable early, at 9:47 a.m., nearly 3 hours before the noon deadline. I sent a confirmation email to Blake and copied the client liaison. I was certain of it. The next morning I used my personal laptop to check my private email backup. I searched for March 14th. There it was. The confirmation email I sent, time-stamped 9:47 a.m. Subject line: Titanium Phase 2 deliverable. Submitted early. But according to Blake's presentation, the deadline was missed by 6 hours. The numbers didn't align. Someone had changed something. I pulled up my personal calendar where I documented every submission. March 14th. Phase 2 delivered at 9:47 a.m. Client response received at 11:23 a.m. with approval. How could I have missed a deadline when the client had already approved the work before noon? One detail doesn't lie. And that detail told me everything I needed to know. 2 days later, HR called me back. Teresa Campos asked how I was handling everything. I told her I wanted to see the evidence against me. Teresa folded her hands on the desk. "I understand your frustration," she said softly. "But right now the best thing you can do is stay cooperative. Don't create conflict." Her tone was almost protective, like she was trying to warn me of something she couldn't say directly. Is there anything I should know? I asked carefully. She hesitated. Blake Ashford has been with this company for 12 years. He has strong relationships with leadership. I understood immediately. They already believed him. If I wanted to survive this, I couldn't just tell the truth. I needed proof. Undeniable, unshakable proof. Thank you for being honest, I said quietly. As I left, she called after me. Document everything. Turned back. She was already looking at her computer screen. That weekend I reached out to an old friend from IT, Leo Martins. We'd worked together on a security audit 2 years ago and stayed in touch. I asked him casually if there was any way to recover archived project logs that might have been removed from the main system. Leo was quiet for a moment. Officially, well, if it's deleted, it's gone. Then he paused. But there's an old backup server we decommissioned last year. It still runs automated mirrors of critical projects for compliance. Nobody really monitors it anymore. IT claims they can't retrieve anything from it. But that's only half true. My pulse quickened. Could the titanium project logs be there? Leo hesitated. Maybe. But accessing it without authorization could get you in serious trouble. I weighed the risk. If I did nothing, Blake's false narrative would destroy me. If I acted, I might find the truth buried in a system everyone thought was dead. Can you show me how to access it? Yes. Leo sighed but agreed. That night he walked me through the process. Within an hour, I was staring at months of archived data that supposedly didn't exist. Someone had moved files after hours. Someone had covered their tracks. And now I could see exactly where they'd stepped. Blake moved quickly to erase me from the titanium project. Within a week, he reassigned all my responsibilities to Jordan Brennan, his hand-picked favorite. Jordan was competent but inexperienced with projects this size. He lacked the institutional knowledge I'd built over months. But Blake didn't care about quality. He cared about control. I watched from a distance as Jordan struggled with tasks I could have completed in my sleep. Deadlines slipped. Client emails went unanswered for days. Small mistakes began appearing in reports, the kind of errors that accumulate into bigger problems. Blake covered for him every time. He reassured the client. He adjusted timelines. He spun every failure into a learning opportunity. But the cracks were forming. What Blake didn't realize was that his overconfidence was working in my favor. He believed I was finished, humiliated, and powerless. He stopped watching me. He stopped worrying about what I might do. In his mind, I was already gone. That was his first mistake. While he focused on managing Jordan and maintaining his image, I quietly gathered every piece of evidence the old server had preserved. Blake thought he'd won. He stopped guarding his secrets. And that's exactly when I started finding them. I spent 3 nights combing through the archived logs, cross-referencing file edits, timestamps, and access records. At first, it seemed like chaos. Hundreds of changes made across dozens of documents. But then I started seeing the pattern. Every time a problem occurred on the titanium project, the same user ID appeared in the system logs. Document edits made after hours. Approval workflows bypassed. Deadlines quietly revised in the project management software. The user ID wasn't mine. It was Blake's. On March 12th, 2 days before the deadline I supposedly missed, Blake accessed the project timeline at 11:34 p.m. He changed the submission deadline from noon to 9 a.m. I had submitted at 9:47 a.m., 47 minutes after the new deadline he created. He manufactured my failure. On April 3rd, Blake edited a budget report I'd submitted, inflating cost estimates by 15%. Then he forwarded it to the client with my name on it, making it look like I'd miscalculated. On May 8th, he deleted 3 approval emails from the client that praised my work. He replaced them with vague revision requests that made it seem like I wasn't meeting expectations. One by one, the pieces fell into place. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was sabotage. I focused on the March 14th incident because it was Blake's strongest accusation. He'd built his entire case around my supposed inability to meet deadlines. But the archived logs told a different story. On March 12 at 11:34 p.m., Blake logged into the project management system. He accessed the titanium project timeline and changed the Phase 2 deadline from 12 p.m. to 9 a.m. No notification was sent. No email announcement. The change was silent. I submitted the deliverable at 9:47 a.m. on March 14, unaware the deadline had been moved. 47 minutes late according to the altered timeline. On time according to the original agreement. But here's what made it undeniable. At 11:23 a.m. that same day, the client sent an approval email for the Phase 2 deliverable. They were satisfied. They had no complaints. Blake deleted that email from the project records. Then he sent his own message to leadership claiming the late submission had caused client dissatisfaction and cost overruns. I pulled up the approval chain for the timeline change. It required director-level authorization. Blake had approved his own edit. The system recorded everything. His name, his user ID, his digital signature. The question wasn't whether he'd done it. The question was why. And more importantly, who else knew? I needed to confirm Blake's physical presence in the office on the night's files were altered. Security badge data would have been perfect, but I no longer had access. So I started casually talking to coworkers. During lunch, I sat with Olivia Chen from accounting. She often worked late to close monthly reports. I mentioned how quiet the office gets after hours. She laughed. "You'd be surprised who stays late though," she said. "Last month I was here until midnight 3 nights in a row. I kept seeing Blake's office light on past 11 p.m. My heart raced. Which week was that? Olivia thought for a moment. Early March, I think. March 12th was early March. The night Blake altered the project timeline. Did you ever see anyone else? She shook her head. Just Blake. I thought it was weird he was staying so late. I thanked her and changed the subject. But the timeline was tightening. Blake was in the office. He had access. And now I had a witness. For 2 weeks, I'd been fighting back in small ways. Asking questions in meetings. Requesting documentation. Pushing for clarity. But Blake was too skilled at deflecting. Every time I challenged him, he turned it around, making me look defensive or difficult. So I changed tactics. I stopped arguing. I stopped defending myself. I stopped asking questions. In our next team meeting, Blake made a subtle dig about the importance of accountability. I nodded along. When HR checked in on my progress, I told them I was reflecting on where I could improve. I showed humility. I showed compliance. Blake noticed the change immediately. In the hallway one afternoon, he approached me with that same fake sympathy from before. "I'm glad you're taking this seriously," he said. "I know it's been hard, but growth comes from these moments." I forced a small smile. "You're right. I've learned a lot." He seemed satisfied, relieved even. Over the next week, I watched him relax. He stopped monitoring my emails. He stopped questioning where I was during the day. In his mind, I'd been broken. I'd accepted my fate. He thought the fight was over. But I wasn't broken. I was just done wasting energy on battles I couldn't win in public. Now I was focused on the war he didn't know I was fighting. Leo had mentioned something during our initial conversation that I kept coming back to. The old backup server wasn't just a mirror. It was designed for external audits. That meant every action recorded there was time-stamped, immutable, and legally compliant. If anyone ever questioned the data, it would hold up in any investigation. Blake had been meticulous about covering his tracks in the main system. He'd edited documents, deleted emails, and altered timelines. But he'd forgotten about the one system nobody paid attention to anymore. I downloaded everything. Every log entry. Every file edit. Every access record. I organized it chronologically, cross-referencing each action with Blake's official narrative. The evidence was devastating. Not just 1 or 2 questionable edits, but a clear, deliberate pattern of sabotage spanning 4 months. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't miscommunication. This was premeditated destruction of my career. I saved multiple copies on encrypted drives and backed everything up to a secure cloud account. Then I prepared a summary document. Clean. Professional. Factual. No emotional language. No accusations. Just timestamps, user IDs, and system logs that told the story themselves. This kind of evidence ended careers. And it was about to end Blake's. Teresa from HR called me in for another meeting. She asked how I was adjusting and whether I'd given thought to next steps. I knew what she was really asking. Was I going to accept a quiet exit or keep pushing back? I want to move forward productively, I said carefully. But I need documentation of the specific issues raised against me. Dates, examples, supporting evidence. Teresa's expression shifted slightly. We've provided a summary of concerns. I need the actual records, I pressed. The emails, the missed deadlines, the client complaints Blake referenced. I want to understand what happened so I can address it properly. There was a long pause. Teresa glanced at her notes, then back at me. I'll need to check with Blake on what's available. Why would you need to check with him? I asked calmly. Shouldn't HR have independent documentation? Her silence was answer enough. I'll see what I can do, she said finally. But her voice had changed. Less certain. More cautious. As I left, I saw her write something down. She was starting to ask questions she hadn't asked before. The narrative was beginning to crack. And Blake's perfect story was starting to show the seams. A week later, leadership scheduled a routine project review for the titanium project. Blake presented Kyle's progress with his usual confidence. But executive Vanessa Park started asking pointed questions. Why did the Phase 3 timeline shift by 2 weeks? Blake explained that Kyle needed additional time to ensure quality. Vanessa frowned. But the client emails suggest they were satisfied with the original pace. Blake's answer was smooth but longer than necessary. He used corporate language that sounded important but didn't actually answer the question. Vanessa wrote something down. Another executive, Thomas Reeves, jumped in. There's a 15% increase in projected costs. Was that flagged during initial planning? Blake shifted slightly. That was an oversight in the early projections. Thomas nodded slowly but didn't look convinced. After the meeting, I heard Vanessa had pulled the original project files herself. She was comparing them to Blake's recent reports. Leadership wasn't accepting his narrative blindly anymore. Blake's arrogance was leaking. While digging through the archived server, I found something I hadn't expected. An email thread from late February between Blake and Jordan. The subject line read, "Timeline adjustments, confidential." In the email, Blake instructed Jordan to implement several changes to the project management system after my Phase 2 submission. He specifically mentioned moving deadlines and revising approval workflows. The email ended with a line that made my stomach turn. Make sure these updates reflect proper accountability. We need a clear record if issues arise. Jordan had responded. Understood. Changes made as discussed. This wasn't just sabotage. This was coordination. Blake hadn't acted alone. He'd brought Jordan into it, using him to implement the technical changes while Blake controlled the narrative. The email was dated February 28th, 2 weeks before the March 14th deadline I supposedly missed. Blake had been planning this for weeks. I printed the email and added it to my evidence folder. Blake's fingerprints were everywhere now. Not just on the system logs but in his own written words. He'd documented his own crime. Jordan was starting to crack under pressure. The titanium project was more complex than Blake had led him to believe. And without my institutional knowledge, Jordan was drowning. In a team meeting, Jordan presented a status update that contained 3 significant errors. He'd misidentified a client requirement. He'd miscalculated the budget impact of a scope change. And he'd missed a contractual deadline that triggered a penalty clause. Blake tried to cover for him, smiling and reframing the mistakes as minor hiccups. But Vanessa Park wasn't buying it anymore. These aren't hiccups, she said firmly. This is the second missed deadline in 3 weeks. What's the root cause? Jordan fumbled through an explanation. Blake jumped in to help, but his defense only made things worse. After the meeting, I overheard Jordan and Blake in the hallway. Jordan's voice was strained, almost panicked. I can't keep up with this. There are processes she had in place that I don't understand. The client is asking questions I don't have answers for. Blake's response was sharp. Figure it out. I brought you onto this project because I trusted you. But trust wasn't enough. Jordan didn't have the skills or the knowledge to succeed. And every mistake he made invited comparison. Comparison to me. To the work I'd done. To the results I'd delivered. Leadership was starting to wonder if they'd fired the wrong person. I knew I couldn't just walk into leadership's office with my evidence. Blake had spent months building relationships and credibility. If I accused him directly, it would look like a desperate attempt to save myself. I needed a neutral third party. Someone who couldn't be influenced by politics or personal loyalty. I needed compliance. I scheduled a meeting with the company's ethics and compliance officer, Malcolm Torres. I didn't accuse Blake of anything. I simply presented a concern about data integrity on the titanium project. I showed Malcolm the timeline discrepancies, the deleted client emails, the after-hours system access that didn't align with official records. I framed it as a potential audit risk, not a personal vendetta. Malcolm's expression grew more serious with each document I shared. Where did you get this data? He asked. From the archived compliance server, I said calmly. The one maintained for external audits. He couldn't dispute that. The server existed specifically for this purpose. Malcolm spent an hour reviewing everything I'd brought. Finally, he closed the folder and looked at me directly. I'm going to need to escalate this. If what you're showing me is accurate, we have a serious problem. 3 days later, I received an email. A formal compliance audit had been triggered for the titanium project. All relevant personnel would be interviewed. All system access would be reviewed. The system had activated. And Blake couldn't stop it. Blake found out about the audit within hours. The next morning, he cornered me in the hallway near the elevators. His friendly mask was gone. What did you do? He asked, his voice low and tight. I kept my expression neutral. I don't know what you mean. The compliance audit, he hissed. You triggered it. You went behind my back. I met his eyes. I raised concerns about data integrity. That's what employees are supposed to do. His jaw clenched. You're making a mistake. This company values loyalty. You're burning bridges you can't rebuild. I smiled slightly. I'm not burning bridges, Blake. I already crossed the river. His face reddened. For a moment, I thought he might say something he'd regret. But he caught himself. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. You have no idea what you've started. This will come back on you. I'll make sure of it. Then he walked away, his footsteps heavy and angry. I stood there for a moment, my heart pounding but my resolve stronger than ever. Blake's confidence had turned to desperation. And desperate people make mistakes. Big ones. The compliance audit moved faster than I expected. Malcolm Torres brought in a third-party forensic team to review the titanium project records. They requested raw system logs, the ones Blake had altered in the main system. But they also requested data from the archived compliance server. Blake couldn't intercept that. He had no access to the old backup system. No way to edit or delete what was stored there. I watched from a distance as the auditors set up in a conference room, laptops and documents spread across the table. Blake was called in for an interview. So was Kyle. So was I. When my turn came, I answered every question calmly and factually. I didn't accuse Blake. I didn't embellish. I simply told the truth and pointed the auditors toward the archived logs that told the rest of the story. One of the auditors, a woman named Stephanie Cross, asked me directly, "Why didn't you report these discrepancies sooner?" "I didn't have proof," I said honestly. I knew something was wrong, but I needed evidence that couldn't be disputed. She nodded, writing something down. You've certainly provided that. 2 days later, Malcolm called me into his office. The preliminary findings support your concerns, he said carefully. We've identified multiple unauthorized system changes and significant inconsistencies in the project documentation. I felt a wave of relief, but I kept my voice steady. What happens now? Malcolm closed his folder. The final report goes to leadership next week. The conference room was the same one where Blake had destroyed my reputation 3 months earlier. The same screen, the same chairs, the same executives seated around the table. But this time everything was different. Malcolm Torres stood at the front of the room with the compliance team beside him. Blake sat across from me. His expression carefully controlled, but his eyes betraying his worry. Vanessa Park opened the meeting. We're here to review the findings from the titanium project audit. Malcolm, please proceed. The screen lit up. But this time it wasn't my name in red. It was Blake's. Malcolm walked through the evidence methodically. Timeline alterations. Deleted client emails. After-hours system access that coincided with unauthorized edits. Every action traced back to Blake's user ID. The room was silent. Not uncomfortable silence like before. This was the silence of shock. Of realization. Blake tried to interject. There's clearly been some kind of system error. User IDs can be spoofed. This doesn't prove. We verified the digital signatures, Malcolm interrupted. These actions were authenticated with your credentials and approved with your authorization codes. Blake's face went pale. Benjamin Reeves leaned forward. Did you or did you not alter the Phase 2 deadline after it had been agreed upon with the client? Blake hesitated. That hesitation told them everything. The room had turned. And this time silence hit differently. Malcolm continued the presentation without emotion. Just facts. Just timelines. Just evidence. March 12, 11:34 p.m. Blake Ashford accessed the project management system and changed the Phase 2 deadline from 12 p.m. to 9 a.m. No authorization from the client. No notification to the team. March 14, 11:23 a.m. Client sent approval email for Phase 2 deliverable. March 14, 2:47 p.m. Blake Ashford deleted client approval email from project records. April 3, 10:15 p.m. Blake Ashford edited budget report, inflating cost estimates by 15%. May 8, 9:42 p.m. Blake Ashford deleted 3 client emails containing positive feedback. The forensic team had matched every system log with Blake's access records. They'd cross-referenced his badge data showing he was physically in the building during each incident. They'd recovered the deleted emails from the backup server. There was no ambiguity. No room for interpretation. The evidence was absolute. Vanessa Park stopped taking notes. She just stared at Blake, her expression a mixture of disbelief and anger. Benjamin Reeves shook his head slowly. Even Teresa from HR looked stunned. Blake tried one more time. This is a misunderstanding of process. I was making corrections to ensure accuracy. Malcolm held up a hand. The forensic analysis shows deliberate alteration of records to create a false narrative of employee underperformance. This isn't a misunderstanding. It's misconduct. The room went silent again. And this time, no one came to Blake's defense. Blake's composure finally shattered. His voice rose, defensive and sharp. This is an overreaction. Yes, I made some process adjustments, but that's within my authority as director. I was trying to protect the project from what? Vanessa interrupted. From your own employee who was exceeding expectations. Blake faltered. There were communication issues. Things weren't being documented properly. I needed to create clearer accountability. Benjamin leaned forward. By fabricating missed deadlines. By deleting client approval emails. I didn't fabricate anything, Blake insisted. The timeline needed adjustment. The client was unhappy. The client sent 3 emails praising the work, Malcolm said flatly. You deleted them. Blake opened his mouth, then closed it. His face was red now, a mix of anger and panic. He turned to Jordan, who was sitting quietly at the end of the table. Jordan, you know how complex this project was. Tell them. Jordan didn't look up. I only did what you asked me to do. The betrayal in Blake's eyes was instant. He'd brought Jordan into his scheme, and now Jordan was distancing himself to save his own career. One of the IT representatives spoke up for the first time. The logs show Director Ashford's credentials were used to authorize all changes in question. There's no evidence of system compromise or unauthorized access. These were deliberate actions. That single sentence destroyed Blake's last defense. The room turned cold. And everyone in it knew exactly what came next. Vanessa Park's voice was steady but final. Blake Ashford, effective immediately. You are suspended without pay pending a full investigation. Your system access is revoked. Your company assets will be collected before you leave today. Blake stared at her in disbelief. You can't be serious. I've been with this company for 12 years. I've delivered millions in revenue. You've also committed misconduct that jeopardizes our client relationships and exposes the company to legal liability, Benjamin said. This isn't negotiable. 2 security officers entered the room. Blake looked around desperately, searching for someone who might defend him. No one spoke. No one met his eyes. This is a mistake, he said, his voice quieter now, almost pleading. You're going to regret this. Vanessa stood up. What we regret is not catching this sooner. Collect your personal items. Security will escort you out. Blake stood slowly, his face drained of color. As he walked toward the door, he glanced at me. There was no arrogance left, no confidence, just the hollow realization that everything he'd built was gone. His bonus was frozen. His reputation was shattered. And his career was over. The door closed behind him, and the room exhaled collectively. Malcolm turned to me. We owe you an apology. And more than that. But I didn't feel victorious yet. Not quite. 2 days later, I was called into Vanessa Park's office. She sat across from me with a formal letter. First, I want to apologize on behalf of the leadership team, she began. We failed you. We should have investigated more thoroughly. I nodded but said nothing. She slid the letter across the desk. Your record has been cleared. All disciplinary actions removed. We're reinstating you to the titanium project immediately. I scanned the letter. Everything Blake had said was officially retracted. There's more, Vanessa continued. We're promoting you to senior project director. The promotion includes a salary increase and a formal apology. It was everything I should have wanted. Vindication. Recognition. But as I sat there, I realized something important. This company had believed Blake without question. They'd humiliated me. They'd locked me out. Yes, they were making it right now. But only because I'd fought for it. If I hadn't been meticulous, I would have been erased. Thank you, I said quietly. I'll consider the offer. Vanessa looked surprised. Consider it. I smiled politely. I need time to think. I stayed at the company for 6 more months. I led the titanium project to a successful completion. I trained my replacement. I left on my own terms with a glowing reference and a network of colleagues who finally saw me for who I really was. Blake never contacted me again. I heard through former co-workers that he struggled to find work. His reputation in the industry was destroyed. No one wanted to hire a director who'd sabotaged his own employee. Jordan was demoted but kept his job. He sent me an apology email months later. I never responded. As for me, I moved into a stronger role at a competitor. Better pay, better culture, better leadership that valued integrity over politics. I learned something important through all of this. Lies are loud. They demand attention and create drama. But evidence is patient. It waits quietly in backup servers and archived logs, in timestamps and digital signatures that don't forget. And arrogance always leaves a trail. Always. Blake thought he was untouchable. He thought his relationships and his tenure made him invincible. But the moment he stopped watching his own steps, he walked straight into the trap he'd built for me. I didn't need revenge. I just needed the truth. And sometimes the truth is the most powerful weapon of all.